Hey, what's going on, everyone? I'm excited to bring to you Thamina Stoll, who is you're a senior sales consultant for LinkedIn Learning Solutions now, right?
Correct. Yeah. I'm so excited to be here with you today, Davidson. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I was really touched by when I met you when we were in this program where they're training a lot of ERG leaders to so it was awesome just meeting. I really enjoyed the global events that we have. I think one of the silver linings about this COVID, if there is that there's much more of a global feel to a lot of our events. And, I noticed like I'm connecting a lot more with global, even L&D workshops. I'm noticing I'm meeting a lot more people from Dublin. So I guess
Mhm.
that's like one good thing about it. How are you
I agree.
holding up during this time?
Yeah, I mean, it's been very challenging for sure over the past couple of months. There were a lot of question marks in regards to my next play internally with LinkedIn. Um, my partner is American, so he's based in the US, so we haven't seen each other in half a year at this point due to various travel restrictions being imposed. So it has been tough, definitely like an emotional roller coaster for sure. But my team has been really great. My manager has been very supportive. So overall, I'm just like really grateful to be working for an amazing company like this.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like it's hard to be like super grateful because sometimes you feel like, man, like a lot of people are struggling, and then here I am. So it's like there's almost like even like a survivor guilt of just being able to feel gratitude sometimes. I don't know about you,
Mhm.
but I feel that way where I'm like, because a lot of people I know are furloughed or people are, who are in the tech industry, I would say are definitely feeling it a lot more. Um, and then here I am where I'm like, yeah, LinkedIn for the most part, I would say it's pretty business as usual. You know what I mean? Like if I was to be
Mhm.
honest, like because
Mhm.
the whole job like is all virtual anyways, right? Like all the Zoom calls, like everything I did was virtual. So I'm like
Mhm.
a lot hasn't really changed in that aspect. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I feel like while we can all acknowledge that obviously there is a global pandemic going on, and we can be grateful for still having a job and for having the technological infrastructure that allows us to still do our jobs for the most part, right? But I still think it's totally okay to also acknowledge that, on some days you might not feel 100%, and on some days you might miss your friends, family that you haven't been able to see. You might feel really, really sorry for the people who lost their jobs, people who, have family members who were seriously affected by COVID. So while I think it is important to still be grateful for everything that you have, especially for your health as a young professional, I still think it's okay to also grieve a little bit during time.
Yeah, you strike me as a very like compassionate person. I'm curious as to like what has happened in your lifetime that has you be compassionate, right? Because I think it's a learned skill over time. So I'm curious as to was it because you've traveled and you've experienced a lot of different cultures? Like would love to hear kind of like your upbringing, how that came to be about.
Yeah, very good question, Davidson. So just for context, so I was born and raised in Germany, and then I moved to the States for college to attend Duke. And being at Duke was really a very transformational experience for me because for the first time I was surrounded by people from many, many different nations and backgrounds, not just, like in terms of nationalities, but also in terms of race, in terms of socioeconomic status. So that, for example, really allowed me to gain many different perspectives. Like my college roommate, like my she's one of my best friends, and she, for example, is a Black woman. So obviously over the past couple of weeks I was in a lot of pain because I couldn't physically be there for her. And other friends, I have a lot of friends who are part of the LGBTQ plus community. For example, like my partner is Latino. I have a lot of Latino friends. I have a lot of Asian American friends. So I feel like being part of that community at Duke really allowed me to expand my horizon, because at the end of the day, I am a white privileged girl from Germany, right? So that definitely helped a lot in terms of building that compassion. And still, you know, even now that I've been living outside of the US for the past 2 years, I'm still keeping up with the news. I'm still, you know, very much emotionally invested in everything that's been going on over the past couple of weeks and months. And then after moving to Dublin, you know, at our Dublin office alone, I think there is more than 60 nationalities represented at this point. Unfortunately, not a lot of racial diversity at this point, which I'm hoping we will change. And I know that Dublin leadership is really keen on changing that. But still, you have like that ethnic diversity. You meet people from all different paths of life, from different countries. So having that cultural humility and being open-minded is something that has just become increasingly important to me over the past couple of years.
That's awesome. And I guess like how do you, because you being very compassionate, like how do you get from a place of like not feeling the pain of others and actually being able to take action, right? Because I think sometimes when we feel others' pains too much, it's like we're
Yeah.
stuck under the rock with them versus like being outside and objectively being able to, take action effectively.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good question. I think, first of all, it's important to say that it is okay for allies to feel the pain, but at the same time, we have to really acknowledge that the conversation is not about us. Like
Mm,
I was in pain over the past couple of weeks because I was mentioning I have a lot of people that I care deeply about who are very much emotionally affected by by everything that has been happening in the US in regards to police brutality and just systemic racism, like for the past decades. But the conversation is not about me. So what I am trying to do is kind of to transfer my own white privilege to people who lack it, and that means I have to, stand up for communities of of color, for Black communities, Latino communities, Asian American communities, even in situations where that might cause me discomfort. Like obviously it's not fun to call out your friends and family who might be a little more ignorant than you are. um, you have to really own your mistakes as an ally, and you have to understand that the education is really up to you. I mean, obviously it's totally okay and actually good to have conversations with your Black friends, your Latino friends, your Asian American friends, or general underprivileged minorities. But don't ask them how to be a better person. That work is really up to you.
I love that. Yeah, it's taking response. I know for me, I feel like I'm a little bit late to the allyship game, right? But I feel like now I've been much more proactive than usual. But I do find myself like sometimes feeling just so angry, like when I watch some of these documentaries or read some of these books, and I'm just like, it's so for me, it's like even hard to read like a full book all the way through without
Mm-hmm.
just crying,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like for me, I notice like I just need to do it in moderation because sometimes it's
Yeah.
just like the emotions are too much for me to handle. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Totally agree with you on that, because so about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I started reading How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi, and it's one of the most amazing books I've ever read. But similar to you, like it's not something that I can just like read over the course of like a couple of days. Like it is a lot to process, so it does take time. The other day I was watching 13th on Netflix, and as someone who didn't grow up in the US, I was just astonished by the mass incarceration that has been going on in the US. I knew it was an issue, but I didn't know how big of an issue it actually was. And
Mhm.
similar to what you're just saying, I wasn't able to finish the movie like in one piece. I think at this point I still have about a third left, so I totally get it. It definitely takes some time, but the fact that we're we're starting and proactively trying to educate ourselves on how to be better allies, I think that's a good start already.
Yeah, that's a good book. I've also just finished White Fragility, and that
Mm-hmm.
was probably one of the best books I've ever read. And then now we actually have a LinkedIn Learning. Shout out to LinkedIn Learning. But you know, it does make me feel much more happy that, LinkedIn, that the product that we're providing in the diversity, inclusion, belonging tracks are free, for the time being. So that makes me feel a lot better about just like who I'm being in the world, to know that, like, all right, I could stand by my product, and we're doing good work to educate people. So
Totally. And it really is a continuous process that never stops as being an ally, because obviously saying you're an ally is much easier than actually being one.
right.
But it does take, this journey of even like unlearning and learning new things again, re-educating yourself, challenging the status quo, challenging what the general education has provided us while we're still in school. Because obviously there were a lot of things that the history books have left out, to cover up some of the horrendous mistakes that especially Americans have done in regards to the Black community.
This might be a pretty controversial thing to ask you, but like, even
Mhm.
like with Duke, right, with the lacrosse team, I felt like that was like a pretty controversial, like. So I don't know. It's interesting because I think, when you go to college, at least like from the outside, it seems like Duke is a very like high socioeconomic,
Mhm.
like, for a lot of the athletes and stuff like that. So when you
Yes.
said that there was a pretty big disparity of even that, I was surprised. I'm like, oh, okay. So it was pretty diverse, like in terms of like.
Um, yes and no. I would totally agree with your statement that Duke is very, very privileged and predominantly white. I just happened to find myself in a community of people that was definitely more diverse. Like my sorority was the most diverse sorority on campus, and I'm not saying that there wasn't room for improvement, because there was always room for improvement, and there
Hmm,
were a lot of white privileged kids walking around. Definitely, I'm not trying to sugarcoat that by any means. I just personally felt like I was very lucky in the sense that I was surrounded by a pretty diverse group
hmm.
of people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, from different nationalities, different races, different sexual orientation. And again, I think that was one of the main reasons why I became so invested
Hmm.
in the topic of diversity, inclusion, and belonging in the first place.
Do you think it had to do with because you came from another country, so you kind of gravitated more towards like, I wouldn't say misfits, that's like but like just out of the norm? Would you say that had something to do with it?
Um, maybe unconsciously. I don't know. I mean, my first roommate at Duke, for example, she is English American, but also Asian Americans. Like she's biracial. So she was one of the first points of contact that I had. And then when I went to recruit for sororities, I ended up in this more like diverse sorority, which was fantastic. And that's where I ended up making most of my friends. And I mean, there's still so much improvement in regards to Greek life in general. I don't agree with everything that's going on in the fraternal system.
Hmm.
Still a lot of patriarchy and
Hmm.
misogyny, unfortunately. Um, but yeah, I was always kind of looking to just like find good people and surround myself with people of diverse backgrounds, diverse thoughts, and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think, like, for me, I've noticed, like, I think working at LinkedIn, like, we are lucky where it we do, I mean, like with anything, right? We still have ways to go, right? Like you mentioned, we're not perfect, no company is. But I do find myself being a little bit more open to, I guess, hearing about the, Latino experience or the
Mm-hmm.
Black experience. As I think when I was
Mm-hmm.
younger, especially in college, I joined like an all Asian fraternity.
Mhm.
So, I definitely noticed that it was easier to stick to that comfort zone, right? Versus me
Mm.
actually being compassionate and hearing about other ethnicities or, people. So I definitely think LinkedIn has opened up my eyes in terms of just starting to hear these conversations. So I'm very grateful that LinkedIn is creating a space where I am more open to these things. But a lot of times, like it, it is uncomfortable, right? Sometimes like you're like, I
Yeah.
had no idea, and then you start to reflect, and you're like, wow, like
Mhm.
it's crazy, like how I guess ignorant I was in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree with you. And that discomfort is exactly what we need right now. Things are not going to change if people are not willing to enter that uncomfortable zone, right? Because again, they need to unlearn, they need to question the status quo, they need to educate themselves, they need to watch these movies that we are just talking about that are just absolutely mind blowing in the most negative way, right? So um, LinkedIn does provide that environment, and I'm really grateful that we do have all these ERGs that cater to those needs and that can also provide safe spaces. Um, but again, if we look at the overall um, racial distribution at LinkedIn, there's still so much work to be done.
Mm.
We need a lot more racial diversity, and I know senior leadership has committed to trying to close that racial gap. Um, but again, like having those safe spaces, I think it's a really great start, and having also that self-awareness on our end as allies is really key.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, to be honest, like even in the learning org, at least on the AE side, like I've definitely have communicated that, I would love to in the Glint the employee satisfaction surveys, I gave feedback and said that, hey, it'd be great if we focused on because I think LTS, like the talent side, does a pretty good job of, I guess,
Mm,
from my perspective, but on the
mm,
side, I feel like we have a long ways to go. So I have
yeah.
communicated that, but even doing that for me, it's like uncomfortable, because like you're always kind of afraid of like, hey, like whatever it goes back to me, and then so
Yeah.
I don't know. It's I feel like I'm constantly put into uncomfortable situations, and I'm thankful that I do it, but sometimes I fear for my job. Like I'm like, hey, like I probably shouldn't have went to the senior director and talked about how like there's no representation on the learning side when I go to, especially on a managerial level, when I go to a lot of these events. It's often just minorities going to support each other, right? And it's like really uncomfortable for me. And sometimes I'm like, man, like what if I get fired for like pushing the
Mhm.
envelope too much? So I don't know. For me, it's
Mhm.
so scary to even like bring it up, like even though I'm almost like a year into working at LinkedIn.
Yeah, and then like imagine how someone who is black must be feeling then, right? Like they're directly affected, and if you have someone who is black and nobody around them looks like
Hmm.
nobody understands their struggles, like how do you then communicate that effectively? So
Yeah.
for that reason, I think it is so important for us who are more privileged to speak up and enter that uncomfortable zone and to have those conversations. And I mean, LinkedIn, we're all about being open, honest, and giving constructive feedback, right? So I feel like at LinkedIn, it's probably not as big of a deal having to fear for your job. But look at other industries that are still very dominated, like male and white dominated, like
Right.
finance industry, for example. I've heard the most terrible, terrible experiences that some of my friends and who are people of color have been experiencing in those sectors and those industries. So I feel like at least in the tech industry we can be quite lucky. But again, like so much room for improvement.
On a kind of a different topic, but kind of
Mhm.
related, I think me one of the most like eye-opening, or for me one of the most growth moments, I think, was when we had Garrett's like learning onboarding, where I met like tons of people from Dublin, and we spent a whole week together. We went out and like got to really know each other. So I would recommend for anyone who hasn't worked for a global company yet. I know a lot of American companies like tend to, there's a lot of companies that only are in America, right? And I'm sure a lot of companies have companies like that. But I feel like for me, like some of the most eye-opening moments for me is just being able to work for a global company where, during the sales kickoff where I got to meet literally thousands of others and spend like a whole week together. So
Mhm.
I would highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't worked for a global company yet, because I do think it's for me at least like one of the most transformative experiences like that I've ever had.
Oh, I totally agree with you. Again, like 60 plus nationalities represented in the Dublin office alone, which is always mind blowing. And if you do have the opportunity to expand your horizon a little bit by engaging in conversations with people that are different from you, that have different experiences, maybe even a different outlook on the world, like I mean, at the end of the day, LinkedIn is a global company, but it's still very US centric, even though I appreciate their efforts trying to localize more. I know, especially on the marketing end, what's working in the US market doesn't work in the German or French or Scandinavian market, for example. So there's steps the company has taken in that regard. But yeah, sometimes it's also funny for us Europeans to observe how American LinkedIn still is at the end of the day.
Yeah. That's funny because I thought the same. I worked for a company that was based in Warwick, in the UK.
Mm,
It was so funny because like us American, there was only six of us in the US, and we would always complain about where like, oh, they're so British, like
yeah.
all the white papers, all the marketing material, like the verbiage. And it's
Mm,
funny hearing the other like way around, right?
yeah.
That's
I
funny.
mean, that's and it's completely normal. It's fine as long as you can acknowledge it and as long as you kind of provide the resources that allows different regions to make the right decisions to move in the right direction. I can personally only talk about the EMEA region and specifically Europe, right? But I don't even know what it's like for APEC, for example. I'm assuming they must also suffer a little bit under that. And
Huh.
I know in the Singapore office and Beijing, I have no idea. Would love to have a chat with those folks at some point to hear about their unique perspective.
I'm curious now, just so we know, like what about LinkedIn in EMEA that's so American? Because honestly, like we probably don't even know, right? Like, I mean, yeah.
It's like sometimes I, and please don't take this personally, and maybe this is just a very German thing because, I'm on top of my time management and try to be efficient, but sometimes
Yeah.
like meetings just don't get to the point, like they spend like 15 or 20 minutes of the 1 hour meeting just doing small talk and you know talking around something and don't get to the point, right? And like to me it doesn't matter, like I lived in the US for 4 years, so I'm used to that and I can certainly engage in that. But if there's a deadline I have to meet, or if there's some other meetings that I have to prepare for, I'm like, okay, can you please just get to the point? Or like
Yeah.
the way we love to sugarcoat like our company values, like I think they're so important. And again, I love it. Like I consider myself to be very Americanized, but I know a lot of people from other countries who've never lived in the US who find that challenging sometimes and who would like to be a little more straight to the point, more efficient, more um, like genuine. You know what I'm trying to say?
It's funny because I think it might be a LinkedIn thing because LinkedIn is like famous for just having we have way too many meetings, I think. Like I read some books and it's like if you can get an hour meeting into 15 minutes, make it a 15-minute meeting. Like don't make it an hour meeting, you know? And I've
Yeah,
given that feedback too. I'm like, why do we have these like half an hour meetings that literally you could have sent an email about?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I feel like that when I'm looking at my manager's calendar. Like she's in back-to-back meetings almost all day, every day, and I'm like, are you sure you couldn't just, write an email instead? I don't understand. But again, it's also part of the link. Like I love meetings, especially internal meetings, right? Because you get to see your colleagues who, in most cases, you would also consider your friends. Um, so it is nice, but in terms of productivity, it might not always be the best choice to have so many meetings.
I guess like yeah, I'm curious. Like this might be like I'm just because I don't know too much about German culture, but from
Mm,
here it's like really productive, right? It's more about
yeah,
the efficiency than
yeah.
necessarily like because I think like I hear even in Asian culture, it's like it's all about the relationship, right? It's like before you
Mm,
like you have to have like many dinners before they even
yeah,
talk about like bring up price, right? Is it
yeah.
in Germany like much different?
Yeah, I would say it's very different. I mean, even when you look at work-life balance, and I think that applies to Europe in general, but specifically Germany. I mean, my family who still live in Germany, they have between 30 and 35 vacation days every year, plus like, I don't know,
Huh.
12, 13 public holidays, right? So when you add that up, that's like that's like 2 months almost of vacation each year, and they really like vacation and public holidays. Those are holy grails. Nobody works
Hmm.
on public holidays during vacation. People also don't really work on weekends. Maybe when you're a consultant or in investment banking, then you probably work more hours. But generally speaking, like people probably only work like those 40 hours a week, and at 5:30 p.m. like they're off the clock, and then they're going outside on a hike or go to a beer garden or meet up with friends. They like Germans really value their
Uh,
work life balance, and as a result, because they don't want to work overtime, because they don't want to work on weekends or on vacation, they really try to be as productive and efficient as possible. And it's funny because one of my mom's friends, this was a while ago, she was working for a global company as well, and at some point she had to go on a business trip to Atlanta, and she was there for like a week or two, and when she came back she was just reporting like, now I understand why Americans work so much. They don't get to the point, like they don't get anything done, and you know.
yeah.
And it's funny because even when I think back about my high school education in Germany, in one of my economics classes in high school, and I still vividly remember this, like for each public or for each additional public holiday that you have in Germany, like the country's GDP increases by 1 percentage point,
Huh.
where you would think it would be the opposite, right? But because Germans like value their free time so much,
Huh.
they work much harder when they're actually on the clock.
I could see that because honestly, like right after the shut, like right after like a 3 day weekend, I'm way more productive because I'm like
Mm.
out, right? So that makes sense. So I'm curious in the in the LinkedIn office in EMEA, is there not like work-life balance? Like do people work past 5 o'clock? Like is it I'm just curious.
Um, I think people try to avoid it. There are probably certain roles during certain times of the year where you might have to stay longer. I remember when I was starting in my sales development role early on and tried to build pipeline, I would stay until like 7 or 8 p.m. occasionally.
Yeah.
But I refuse to work on weekends. I refuse to work while on vacation. That was still very important to me. But I feel like the higher up you climb the sales ladder, the more you start to value your free time as well, especially when you have family. Like
Hmm.
I don't think most people work longer than like maybe 6 p.m. in EMEA. But again, this is just from my personal experience. I don't know, like senior managers and directors, like I've also seen them send out emails at like 10, 11 p.m.
Yeah.
on weekend at some point. So um,
Yeah, I do think we have a long way to go in terms of people don't, and I think in a way COVID is good because it allows us to like, hey, like now that we're less distractions, like people probably get stuff done in like 20 hours where normally 40 hours because in the office like there's way more distractions, and like you said,
Yeah.
there's unnecessary meetings and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So in a way, I think people are like, oh, actually, like you can actually get our stuff done in 20 hours and spend like, 5 hours like working out or taking a
Mm,
hike or something else, right? So I think in a way, not to be like overly optimistic, but I do hopefully this shifts like the way we look at work, because some
yeah. I
people,
agree.
I'm guilty of this as well back in my early days, but in New York City at least, dude,
Mm-hmm.
like people we be looking at each other, and then it's like we're waiting for the manager to leave, right? So if the manager leaves at 7, then everyone's like finally leaves. It's like,
Yeah.
dude, like we should be able to leave. Like why, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I feel like that makes no sense, like whatsoever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. And the way I frame it is also productivity guilt. And I experienced that a lot in college.
Hmm.
I felt like, hey, I've done all of my homework, I've submitted my assignments, and like there must be something else that I must be doing, you know. Um, Especially I feel like the first 1 or 2 years out of college when I didn't have any homework anymore is like, wait, like I actually have like free time now, like after 5 6 p.m. I don't have anything to do. And I feel like that's very common for American culture in general, and my time at Duke has definitely instilled that productivity guilt in me.
Hmm.
um, Even now, like I'm working on a side hustle in addition to my full-time job, because I feel like there's still so many other avenues where I could learn, where I could have an impact. So I can totally relate to your experiences of wanting your manager to leave, and then you know leave your.
So, I mean, you did go to Duke, which obviously is a pretty competitive school. So,
Mhm.
because I do think like people think that like success looks a certain way, right? They're like, oh, if I
Yeah.
make money, I'll be happy. If I get to this amazing school, I'll be happy, right? But I
Mm,
have often find that there's almost like not necessarily like a correlation, right? I feel like if anything, the people that I know that are always feel like they're busy, they always have something to do. Like
yeah.
to me, sometimes they seem miserable. Like they're like,
Mhm.
yeah, so I don't know, like where do you find that balance where you're still like productive and you're like successful,
Mm,
but then you
mhm.
still focus on what's important to you, or you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
deep question.
Yeah, very deep question. And I feel like, at age 25, soon to be 26, I still haven't found that balance for myself either, right? I'm still very much, oh my God, like there are all these societal pressures. I went to a great school, so I have to make a lot of money so I can pay back my parents who invested a lot of money in order for me to go to such an amazing place like Duke. Um, I want to have like a nice house. I want to be able to have a family and send them to a great college in the future. So there are definitely a lot of pressures coming from the outside world, and that's not always great. You should find a balance. How that is gonna work out, I don't know. I feel like what's really important is that you always look out for your own personal health. Like I definitely um, am a culprit here myself, because during the most stressful times in a sales job, I didn't take as much care of my body. Like I used to love working out, but then, 1 quarter was really stressful and I just didn't work out as much anymore. Luckily, during COVID, I now have more time and have more time at home. So now I kind of got back into establishing a workout routine.
Hmm.
But that along with sleep, like I can see it with my partner. He is working in the US at a big technology company as well as a software developer, and
Hmm.
you're making him work like a dog. Like he sometimes stays up until like 3 4 5 6 a.m. in the morning, and then does that spiel like all over again, and he works weekends. And yes, they're paying him a lot of money,
Hmm.
but what is he going to do with all the money if he
Hmm.
doesn't have time to spend with his family or with his partner, to travel, to see the world, like, and to also invest in his own health? Like what if he just collapses at age 50 because he's been working so much, and you know his body is just saying nope, that was too much. So in that regard, I I do feel like it's really important to find that work-life balance, but it also looks different for everyone else. I feel like when you have your own company, for example, if you have something that you really own, then you're probably more inclined to work longer hours because it's really like something that you built. But when you're working in a corporate job, maybe you should try to question how much you're working and how much you're actually getting to live with the limited time that you
Mm,
have outside of the office.
yeah. It it is challenging, right? Because at the end of the day, like we like people in tech do make more money than, let's just say, most of other industries,
Mm,
most other people in the world. But then sometimes you kind of question, like you said, like being an SDR is like a really tough job, all right? Like
mhm.
I was an SDR for like 4 years. So I know, like
Oh, wow.
it was brutal.
Yeah.
Um, but then like you said, like sometimes you're like, man, is this worth it? Like I'm
Mm,
busting my ass, like really stressed for like 3 months in a
mm,
row, and it's just for what? So I could make 20,000 more and 30,000 more in
yeah.
my next promotion. Like sometimes you really have to
Mm,
think, like, is it worth it? That's why, like, when people say they want to get into tech sales, I'm like
mm.
be like, think about it, right? Like don't rush into it. Like this is like something that you should definitely think about, because sometimes I'm like, it's not the most, it's not the easiest job in the world, right?
No, I totally agree. And I feel like this is probably the toughest job that I will ever have from like a mental exhaustion
Hmm.
point of view. It is really, really tiring, like especially when you have monthly goals to achieve. But I also do think it has been a great school for me, and I don't think I will ever look back and regret it because I do think it will give me more options moving forward, especially having worked for such an amazing company like LinkedIn that just has a very well established brand around the globe. So I do think it does open some doors. I have some friends who still have student debt to pay off, right? So obviously they're gonna work their butt off the first couple of years, like in consulting or in investment banking to pay off their debt. And I totally get that. But
Hmm.
to some people, that's just a foreign concept, especially to Europeans who usually have access to free college education, or at least not as ridiculously expensive as it is in the US.
Yeah, it is crazy. Like the the rat race that we build from going to these prestigious universities. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you're just like, man, I'm like this old and I still have student loans. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's crazy. But to your point, like I don't regret it, because like I learned so much and I was
Mm,
experienced so much, and I got so it's almost like you're to get into the club, you have to pay your dues. But now that
mm,
of
mm.
like all these opportunities open up for you, right? So
Yeah,
I don't know. It's interesting, but that in itself, it's like a privilege itself, right? So it's
totally, totally. And we're only talking about career trajectory and opportunities right now. If I think about all the friends that I was able to make at Duke, like I met my partner at Duke as well. Like we were talking about the diversity of thought and the compassion, like those are all things that you cannot really put a price tag on, right? Like so if someone asks me like why did you go to Duke, you could have afforded like free education in Germany, I was like, yeah, it was really expensive, but this has changed my life forever, and I will be forever grateful to have met my awesome friends who will be friends for life. I have expanded my horizon. I have gained so many valuable new perspectives. I have got to know myself a lot better, my weaknesses and strengths, and I will be part of an amazing alumni community for the rest of my life. So, there are a lot of cons, but I feel like in my personal experience, at least, the pros far outweigh the cons.
mm, yeah, and I feel like, and I'm like switching topics here, but I feel like what you're doing as like an SDR too. Like I kind of think of it as like being like a student athlete, like a collegiate athlete.
Mm,
It's like
mm,
I'm sure they don't enjoy waking up super early in the morning and
yeah,
putting in the reps and like doing 2 a days or
mm,
whatever. But at the
mm,
end of the day, like that discipline, that work ethic, and all that experience will propel you, because you have like a strong foundation to be successful in life, and to overcome obstacles and stuff like that. So
yeah, I totally agree with that.
yeah. But yeah, this has been an awesome conversation. I really enjoyed your perspectives. Like clearly, I feel like the more you put yourself outside your comfort zone, I think the more you grow as a human being. So clearly, like
Mhm.
by moving to a brand new country and, just exposing yourself to a lot new differences and then moving again to Dublin, like, and yeah, hopefully we'll see you in the US. I have a feeling that, we'll see you hopefully soon.
Yeah, I hope so too, Davidson. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be a guest on your podcast. I feel really, really honored, and yeah, best of luck with everything. And hopefully, we get to see each other live in person sooner rather than later.
Fun. Yeah. Well, take care. Have a good oh wait, do you guys don't have off next week, right?
No, we don't, unfortunately. Well, I have PTO. I am taking some much needed vacation, but no, we don't have a shutdown around 4th of July, unfortunately.
I keep thinking, I'm like, does the whole world have it? Like, I don't even know.
Yeah.
That's how American we are, I guess.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.